Visiting Writers Series, made possible by an endowment from the Bankhead Foundation, the Program in Creative Writing, the Department of English, and the College of Arts and Sciences. Thanks to Katherine Brown and the Book Arts Program for the lovely keepsake commemorating this evening's reading. And thanks as well to John McGaw of the Soup Store for making the readers' books available for purchase in the lobby. The next reading will be with Alice Walker on March 17th.
Yeah!
She will be reading as the keynote speaker of Women and Others, the 2005 Alabama Symposium. Following tonight's reading, there will be a reception at the home of Lily Withrow and Daniel Roderick. Maps are available out in the lobby. As always, please BYOB. If you would like to receive email reminders of upcoming readings, please add your name and email address to the list out in the lobby. In Edwin A. Abbott's Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions, we find this line: "It was in old days, with our learned men, an interesting and oft investigated question. What is the origin of light? And the solution of it has been repeatedly attempted, with no other result than to crowd our lunatic asylums with the would-be solvers." Of course, Abbott's Flatland is the basis for Steve Tomasula's novel Bass, an opera in Flatland, wherein we find the main character, named Square, pitted against legions of questions, with answers, without answers, with seemingly simple yet ultimately complex answers, with answers that he feels may land him in the asylum, if not committed by society, then perhaps committing himself. Steve Tomasula, our Cole Royalty Chair holder and reader for the evening, received his PhD in English from the University of Illinois, Chicago, and currently teaches at the University of Notre Dame. He is the author of 2 novels, Bass, an Opera in Flatland, and In an Oz, and his short fiction, criticism, and essays have appeared in the Iowa Review, Fiction International, McSweeney's, Musing the Mosaic, New Art Examiner, Rain Taxi, Electronic Book Review, and many other journals and magazines. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Steve Tomasula.
Thanks, Andy. This is very nice. Is this on? Oh, yeah. We're going to go sans microphone in a sec. But first, I did want to thank Michael Martone and Sandy Huss and the writing program for having me here, and especially Daniel Roderick and Bei Dao, really the whole class that I've been working with this week. It's been a real pleasure, and I feel like they just sort of adopted me. People pick me up and take me places, and it's been fun, and educational too. At least for me, anyway. It's like, because before I got here, I saw the license plates with Alabama that says "The Stars Fall on Alabama," but I didn't realize they actually hit people. There's a meteor just on the other side of this wall, I think. So that was very interesting. Anyway, we're going to read from Bass, an Opera in Flatland. And so maybe I can just sort of set it up a little bit, because it's an excerpt from the book that was put together for a reading. If you've seen the book, it's very graphically driven, so it's really meant to be read as a visual kind of artifact rather than something you hear. But as Andy said, I've borrowed the characters from Edwin Abbott's Flatland, which is a novelization of geometric principles. In Abbott's book, Square is my main character also. He's tormented by this idea of what the phrase upward but not northward could mean. Because remember, he and all the other geometric characters in this book are all living in the flatland of the page. They're all drawn on this page, and he just can't get his mind around what this third dimension could be. So it really struck me as an apt metaphor for all of us, really. We're all kind of inhabiting our own types of flatland, trying to imagine what another way of being might be, even as we kind of bring that way of living into existence. And here I'm thinking specifically of body modifications, which are, as you all know, becoming increasingly more extreme and increasingly common, to the point where they're sort of changing what it is to be human, what some call the post-human era. So Vaz is very much about this idea of wondering what this third dimension could be. It's comprised of a lot of different sorts of narratives, different kinds of representations of people and what it is to be human. There's comic books and librettos and journalism, lots of scientific tables and graphs and things like that. So we're going to try to mimic a little bit of that feel by letting our narratives kind of weave in and out. And Andy and Lily are very generously offered to help me read this. So just kind of think of us as the Supremes, I guess. Do this without the mic. Should I shut the microphone off?
No, it's okay.
Just so I don't talk into it.
That's fine.
Okay. On the nature of flatland. Imagine a vast sheet of paper on which straight lines, triangles, squares, pentagons, hexagons, and other figures move freely about, but without the power to rise above or sink below it. And you will then have a pretty correct notion of my country and countrymen. Edwin Abbott, Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions, 1884. First pain, then knowledge, a paper cut. He kissed his finger, a gesture of shh, making him both Judas and first and truest lover to his body, a kiss like hers, for hers, comforting as he lay down with the scalpel.
Bright and shining.
On the page in his lap, the world, truth. He'd been writing into existence,
Slicing membranes.
with dead skin white. Paper sans corpuscles, nothing more. The bubble of presence its people and dramas had occupied, pricked by less than a sting, and he buried them
So effortlessly that it would be bloodless.
beneath the hospital form he had cut himself on. Figure out how your story's going to end? Circle asked. Endorphin flattening canals to dampen an uprush of breath through her body into a note of sadness, the octave of a bassoon, because she hadn't found him filling out the consent form, he knew. She crossed her legs, one bare thigh so high on the other that they seemed to cross at the hips. Bauhaus dimensions always made her face seem modern to square, symmetrical with her angular body. Unlike Rubens' puffy women. Likewise, Circle's wide smile, full lips were nothing like the pinched mouths of Victorians, a heritage of genes giving her face and body proportions that happened to be in vogue at their moment in history. A gift. She stopped flipping through an intimate apparel's catalog, its cover model sporting lacy bra, silky smile. His own electrochemistry opened the circle of his mouth to make a soft no, though in truth he had already written his name where it said patient, square. Her eyes remained trained on his,
That ancient hello between hunter and hunted.
and he reshuffled the consent form behind the story he'd been trying to write.
A basic story.
Barely perceptible changes in facial muscles clouded her features,
As they often put it in literature.
and he added, but I will. At first it seemed ludicrous to say that a person could write things that they didn't intend,
As if a hand was the palette of an Ouija board.
but the crossouts on his rough drafts, the arrows and additions mocked him. He tried to tell himself that the final draft, the version that would appear fixed in print, would be the real thing, the thing he wanted to say. But once he X'd out that first word, wasn't what was left revisionist history? And wasn't history, revisionist or otherwise, as much an act of selective forgetting as it was remembering? The way the men who wrote, "We the people," forgot to include Hottentots.
Or the way George/Christine Jorgensen, Flatland's first transsexual, had to forget his/her body in order to remember her/his body.
Dear Sir or Madam,
The problem in writing a story, like editing a body, was in trying to make sense of a pool of ideas.
AGCT.
Before the age of dioramas.
Well, maybe not forgot, Square wanted to tell Circle, trying to fit scatterings to agglutinate.
C.
Castrati.
C.
She/he.
Bits and fragments come together,
Adenine.
Like nucleotides.
like cells.
Thymine.
Some split apart and die.
Guanine.
Others hold up, linking up,
TAG. GAT. Cytosine.
into double helixes.
Or recombine.
Double helixes being both message and material.
CAT.
Mostly unnoticed.
People just became institutionalized, he wanted to say.
Like Martha Nelson, admitted to the Columbus State Institute for the Feeble-Minded,
Message and material becoming bodies solid as bricks.
where she lived for the next 100 years.
No, that's not right.
A premissive clause making some conclusion natural.
Bodies malleable us?
The problem was that the pool was so vast he could be swimming in it unawares. But how could anyone explain that?
Clause not much use as fins.
Words being both the material and message of language.
National Christian League for the Promotion of Racial Purity.
And if it's in the language, it's in the thoughts.
French Academy for Promotion of Language Purity.
And that's what worried him. He wanted to tell Circle about bodies, a legacy.
Often unawares.
1970 laws carrying on 1907 traditions.
Of hidden histories, like the Y chromosome, traceable to a single ancestor.
The unseen, 188,000 years ago. Societies of ants going back 100 million years. Mollusks, 550,000 years.
A common ancestor.
English father, Dutch vader, Gothic vader, Old Norse foir, German vater, Greek pater, French pere, Spanish padre, Sanskrit pitar, Old Irish athir.
The unconsidered.
One English family, the Temple, Nugent, Ascot, Bridges, Chandos, Shenvi, now extinct, had a family shield with 719 symbols, each an icon of their blood tie to another aristocratic lineage.
Or their parents.
Billions of parents.
Inheritance being a matter of lineage. Lineage being a matter of descendancy.
Whites in South Africa.
Descendancy being a matter of pedigree.
Both message and material.
Etymology. This is why isolated gene populations have so few surnames.
The Amish.
Have you ever counted the Castros in the Miami phone book, he wanted to ask? Likewise, 10,000 DNA samples.
Gypsy moths.
Afghans, Apaches, Basques, Bushmen,
Somatium clandestinum.
and hundreds of others.
Mollusks.
All pointing to a common ancestor. Family trees and language trees overlapping like a branch in its shadow.
125,000 generations and counting.
It's just that they combined in ways that weren't always predictable, he wanted to say.
Like words.
Material.
The 3,000 million letters of the DNA lexicon that is a human, after all, being the same letters used to compose a tree.
Or a butterfly.
A matter of vocabulary.
Message.
Like the name Eugene, good gene, well bred, which came into the language via eugenics.
Cognate with euthanasia, good death.
Statistics are a wonderful tool to reveal untold histories, he began to say.
The figure in the carpet.
Average slope of forehead. Whites, men, 134 degrees. Whites, women, 138 degrees. Children, 137 degrees. Newborn infants, white, 141 degrees. Chinese, 142 degrees.
Likewise, by
Uzbeks,
reading court
142
convictions, it can be
degrees.
concluded that no
Negroes,
white man in America
144
ever raped a
degrees.
black woman before
Chimpanzee,
1957.
149 degrees. Orangutans, 174 degrees. DeLongle Parital by M. de Quatrefages, 1858.
10,000 billion ants on Earth.
A chromosome mutation differentiating humans from chimps.
5 million years of sweaty breeding.
Any repetitious act will gradually mutate.
Caterpillar, Acherontia atropos.
Surnames die out.
Pupa,
For lack of a nail,
Even kingdoms.
Animalia.
A final solution.
a theory,
Originally invented for the homosexual problem.
another theory,
Since not all men
like Einar Wegener,
Cynthia Cardaway, Painted Lady.
have male children,
Germany's first transsexual,
who have male children,
like George Jorgensen,
who have male children. When a man dies without a son, the living brother shall go to the widow and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to continue the line of the deceased brother, that his name may not be blotted out from Israel. Deuteronomy 25:5.
Theory again.
Think of it. Parents still name their sons after a sterilization program. Haven't you ever played Chinese telephones, he wanted to say? Good nature and good sense must ever join. To err as human, to forgive divine, which we can see doesn't rhyme unless 10 generations ago Alexander Pope pronounced join as jine. So goes vowels.
And ants.
I'm convinced that in the next century, millions will cut each other's throats because of the 1 or 2 degrees difference in the slope of their foreheads. Joseph Gaiman, 1854. A sequence of letters.
A, G, C, T, signatures of the 4 amino acids that make up all DNA.
Genetic word made flesh.
Given some 3 billion nucleotides within each cell,
And 1,000 million cells per body.
you can see how typos could add up.
That's 3 million AGCTs.
50,000 species of mollusks identified by the shape of their
Theory.
shells.
Heads.
Mostly random. Sort of like the 1,000 typing monkeys who, given enough time, would eventually reproduce an exact copy of Don Quixote, only in reverse.
If a lab today, Chaucer would be illiterate.
In fact, if you start with Old English and run its mutations and fast forward, you can watch it evolve. New brother mean a Christendom, with thought, with a word, with a data, a spark onto ye much in be words. One-sided on time is sower went forth to sow, on will hay was in sowing, some fell be a wayside, on if birds come on devoured it. The ignorant will imagine that the passage has nothing craggy, but if some well learned and as laborious a man would gather all the ideas held within these words, he would open unto us the natural force. Verily, we do not mean all we write, which proceeds from diverse superfluous meanings that occur in many of our words. Yet whether such unnecessary meanings choke good seed or enrich their soil is a consideration that admits of various censures according to the different fancies of men. In other words, men and mutations, as inseparable as seed and cell.
Theories as well.
Nature or nurture?
Finally, he asked, walking through a library, have you ever gotten that creepy sensation of walking through a Victorian collection of mollusks? She only resumed a display of nonchalance by flipping print, the contraction of corrugator muscles that furrowed her brow, giving her answer, that it was his turn. She didn't need to write a story for him to know she had taken hers. It was written in wrinkles from worry over counseling sessions when she couldn't get pregnant. It was written in a tiredness from lack of sleep, from monitoring ovulation, monitoring basal temperature. It was written in microscopic fonts, the shadows of x-rays on fallopian tubes. Did the pill cause cancer? Prenatal exams, big bold letters, a pregnancy leaving stretch marks that made her belly shimmer like an illuminated manuscript. A C-section opening her up to let out stillbirth, as they called it, this epic recorded by a white-hot scar. Then a fever from infection, only to do it all again, this time the cycle interrupted because of her age by a precaution in the 17th week.
Amniocentesis.
A 10-inch needle inserted through her belly to extract the amniotic fluid that revealed a 75% chance of unlucky allies and ended in an abortion, or DNC. The procedure, as the nurse technicians called it, fitting her feet into stainless steel stirrups. And Circle had had
Terminology.
enough, so now it was his turn. A simple thing to ask, considering just a snip, as she put it, as if that was supposed to give him courage. And she was right. It was just a snip compared to what she had gone through. Still, he wrote, if editing their bodies was so natural, why did he feel like Dorothy being carried up, then where? By those transgenic monkeys. Fine, she suddenly said, getting up and tossing her catalog onto the coffee table as she left the room. She was thinking of their last unnamed fetus, of course, and would go through anything to not have to make that decision again. Not that it was the wrong decision. Rather, it was just that they both just wanted to live their common lives, do their common jobs, come home, maybe veg out in front of their low-definition TV, and relax with their garden variety family, not be faced with decisions like that, uncommon questions with no answers, the stuff of opera. That was why the nation became so engrossed in cases like Karen Ann Quinlan's, one of the first to have her life support system shut off.
Just a little editing.
Well, technically not the first. If it's a female, discard it, one Hilarion wrote on June 17, 1 BC to his wife Alis, who was expecting.
Quality control sometimes spilling over into quantity control.
A common sentiment.
A fine line.
In fact, archaeologists were surprised by DNA tests on hundreds of 1 to 2 day old skeletons. The skeletons were found mixed among animal bones, coins, and erotic figurines in a 4th century sewer. But contrary to expectations, many of the infants had been male, probably the unwanted offspring of courtesans who worked in a connected bathhouse.
A buried history.
Common people.
But Karen was the first I had to deal with.
With a common problem.
I meaning us.
And a little editing.
Us meaning those readers who might ask themselves, how would I write another story if it was up to me?
For the good of society and the parents and the infants themselves.
And as bad as the last time had been, they both felt they had dodged a bullet.
Another cliche.
The bullet being the possibility that the results would be negative, but the test itself would cause her to lose the child. Who could live with that? Still, some did, 0.5 to 1.5%, according to the legal disclaimer Circle had signed.
Out of 8,000 abortions performed in Bombay in 1985, 7,997 were of female fetuses.
Put another way, 0.1% were male.
An invisible history.
And that's what scared him. How could you be sure you weren't just acting like any other organ of your century?
Ease of habit.
Vertical transmission.
Old wine in new bottles, as Mother would say.
Soon an endless number of lower races will have been eliminated by the higher civilized races. Charles Darwin.
Even if you were aware that you were drinking wine.
Which you wouldn't.
If Circle became pregnant again, screening would be offered again, given her age. In fact, it was required by their insurance company, for information only. Of course, the counselor, like the last one, would be very nice. No monocle, no scar, probably loved her mother. In a pleasant office, she'd pleasantly say she was only providing information, that she was completely neutral. It's not like they were one of those social undesirables who only chose to be sterilized because it was that or a straitjacket.
Or winos who sold their blood.
But didn't screening imply screening for something bad?
Ellis Island.
Just a little editing.
And didn't the hospital know that no one wanted their baby to be born with something bad? And if something bad was found, didn't the test imply that you should fix it? Why screen if there wasn't a fix?
Can questions predetermine answers?
And if the only fix, say for femaleness, was the procedure, wasn't determining what kind of child should be born the same as deciding what kind shouldn't? Is not answering that question what the counselor meant by neutral information?
The way stepping off a ledge predetermines
And why stop
how you finish this sentence.
with a simple 1 or 0 like male/female?
Microsoft Inc., U.S. Patent Number 513579, method to pre-select sex of offspring.
Or was he just splitting hairs?
X or Y.
A fine line.
Just a little editing.
Common Nazis, of course, having nothing to do with it.
In the land of
We've both read Freud, you know, Circle called from the other room.
Free choice.
Castration imagery, of course, coming to mind.
private parts.
His favorite being the stone testicles from a statue of Oscar Wilde that adorned the author's grave,
Often mistaken for public property.
until broken off by ardent mourners trying to pry back the statue's fig leaf, the testicles becoming a paperweight in the groundskeeper's office. That isn't it at all, he yelled back. Freud also able to dispense with the body, of course. Psychoanalysis being a form of literary criticism, of course,
A play on words.
like anthropology.
Adam meaning man in Hebrew.
Once anthropologists, like Freud, gave up the body.
Adama meaning ground.
That is, once they stopped measuring skulls and started reading garbage or funeral
The
customs.
material.
Molded.
Clay. When the Hottentot Venus died, caustic potash was used to strip the flesh from her skeleton, which was put on display in the Musée de l'Homme.
Same with sociology.
A mold of
Stop measuring, start reading.
her ape-like genitalia.
People just keep getting lighter and lighter.
The Bronx Zoo got Ada Benga, an African pygmy who was kept in a cage with an orangutan.
Name unknown.
Proliferating as they do, X-rays making even clay vessels transparent.
Until public outrage set Ada free.
As Descartes said, I am the representations I make to myself of myself.
Not because a black man was caged like an animal, but because the zoo exhibit Oda lived within depicted him as part of an evolutionary chain.
As opposed to an image of God, a heresy.
CAT scans painting pictures of thought.
Dominion over plants and animals.
In fact, when it comes to our representations, we live in a period of hyperinflation.
Supply and demand, economic man,
Sexual male.
hero,
African American.
fractured,
Hyphenated lives.
celebrity,
Hyphenated Americans.
public life,
Middle class.
master race,
I contain multitudes. Walt Whitman.
Private lives.
schizophrenia,
Personality scale.
country club set,
IQ.
Terminator,
Mammogram.
sperminator,
Brain dead.
virgin birth,
Viewed in stained glass.
A.
Adam in a petri dish,
Cell line.
a bell curve,
A.
Son of man.
patent
G.
pending,
Naked ape.
infants
C.
with baboon hearts,
Monkey's uncle.
G.
humanized mouse,
T.
Acres of skin.
the subject,
Blood
G.
bank.
the material,
C.
Virtual sex.
T.
inflatable Susie,
Vinyl
C.
reality.
Organ
T.
harvest,
A.
South
A.
humans.
Tomato
G.
fish.
Synthetic
C.
skulls.
C.
Consciousness
T.
download.
T.
Synthetic
T.
nerves.
A. T.
Synthetic emotion.
A.
AKA
T.
Prozac.
G.
Every
A.
child by
C.
design.
Just a little
T.
editing.
The modern
A.
Prometheus.
T. A. T. T. A. T. T. G. C. T. GCT, 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 CG, TCG, GCT, GCT, TAA, TCG, GCT, CGCT, TAA, TAA, GCT, GCT, TAA, TAA, GCT, GCT, TTD, oh, I missed one. This is the hard part to read. TAA, GTA, TAT, TGG, TTTA, GCT, GCT, TT, TGTA, TATA.
The facts.
How odd it must be to study anatomy these days,
So unlike the Enlightenment.
the body being a fashionable object of inquiry now as it was then.
of drama also,
When cadavers stunk and had to be stolen from graves.
a buyer's market,
Or the gallows.
Cadavers today just as likely to be virtual.
Dissection being an original form of deconstruction.
surgery theater unlike Adam, not meant as a pun,
Of the soul as well as of the person.
the material,
An antique notion, obviously.
a matter of supply,
Haven't you ever heard of dollars with nothing backing them? Square yelled.
and demand.
Oh, cram it, Circle answered sharply, so sharply he barely recognized her voice.
Bodies once closely identified with individual people.
God too, of course,
Unlike today's visible man, a human body translated into computer images.
a mortal coil, information,
A reflection of
who?
culture as well.
Named Joseph Paul Jernigan when alive.
Online even, www.nlm.nih.gov. Pixels like the dots of ink that make up the body of this text.
Rearrangeable,
Anything done repeatedly will mutate, even telling stories.
Alive and in the act of stealing a microwave oven.
But that doesn't solve a sticky issue. If I am not my clay,
And surprised by Edward Hale, 75.
or my image, or my story, what am I?
Whom he stabbed to death.
A word? A form? AGCT, made flesh?
bodies always weigh in.
This is why once Galileo offered his eye as telescope, only flatlanders refused to look.
And from remorse, or the hope of being made into a Hollywood movie, or because his family wouldn't pay for a funeral,
Histories varying as they do.
donated his body to science,
Earth meaning for all previous history, fixed immovable position.
which froze it solid, then sliced it into 1,878 layers, each the thinness of a microscope slide.
Terra firma.
Transparencies of an anatomy textbook come to life,
Each photographed and CAT scanned and MRI'd and assembled into a virtual corpse.
freed into the ether,
Obviously circled by the sun.
A metaphor for his time?
the material resurrected,
On any computer.
Who would you believe, Galileo's machine or your own eyes?
the images proliferating throughout the world, new worlds,
Via modem.
Via telescope.
New Jernigan.
Light.
Lighter and lighter.
manipulable like clay,
New clay.
ones and zeros,
New pun.
Whenever Square thought of himself as a boy, he suffered something like the anxiety monkeys raised in zoos must feel when they find themselves suddenly returned to the jungle. A vast and terrifying openness all around, his skin tingling with profound disbelief that the person he was thinking about was the same as the one who was thinking. His life sliced into birthdays lived by a series of people so different from one another that he didn't even know which of them to ask, "Who are you?"
A perennial question.
Only asked because a mutation 800,000 years ago allowed the larynx of a chimp to articulate sounds?
Addressed where? Out there? Inside?
First grunts evolving into first doubts.
To I?
But what was that? Tarzan might have wondered, his ape language failing him as he squat beside the skeletons of his long-dead parents. Children's picture books scattered about the cabin they had erected in the jungle when he was born. A drawing of a naked ape in one alphabet book especially held his gaze, his hairless double pictured beneath 3 odd marks. B.
Looked like ants.
O. Y.
I once weighed 8 pounds 9 ounces, I think.
A moving target.
Arius also.
Cells working their way to conclusion, limitless desire,
Survival of the fittest.
bounded by finitude as Dante had it, or sex and death as Freud retold it.
Every person a Siamese twin of body and self?
Any repetitious act will mutate, even storytelling.
Sadly, a story of decline.
1123 Padua. Giacomo, strapped to a balance beam, screamed as his chest was cut open by doctors trying to determine the weight of a soul by letting his out and weighing what was left.
A tragedy, if you believe Shakespeare's definition, a story that ends in a death.
A separation.
A folk tale, all of which follow one of 31 forms, they say.
They poured out his soul
Though your body is constantly plagiarizing itself, it never gets it right.
and filled him with language.
It's like making a copy of a copy.
It takes about 40 copies of chromosome 4 for it to blur into the symptoms known as Huntington's disease.
Copies of copies proliferating. Children as well. The book of life being a common metaphor, birth being a fresh copy.
Though never a fresh story.
This is why all comedies end in a union, usually marriage, the illusion of a new beginning.
Dante's was divine.
23 chromosomes from the mother,
The message.
23 from the father,
And material.
24 if you're still a monkey.
Even a monkey's uncle.
An original, hardly original. DNA being both message and material.
Mitosis.
Separation.
The end of singularity.
The beginning of individuality.
125,000 generations and counting. The dead among us. Not that anyone would mistake a life for a story,
170 new comedies born a minute.
82 tragedies.
or culture for nature,
Shylocks.
Ada Benga.
Pound of flesh.
Hottentots.
or a person for their representation.
Frito Bandito.
1 billion speakers of Chinese, 5.3 billion speakers of 6,000 other languages too. That's 5.3 billion mouths opening, closing,
10.6 billion heart valves.
Opening. Closing.
eyes spilling with equal ease from every one.
11.7 billion gallons of blood.
Ebbing. Flowing.
Tide and time wait for no man.
Nor woman, obviously.
Still, it gets confusing.
5.3 billion by 60 trillion cells, each both message and material.
Bodies becoming as rearrangeable as they are.
And malleable as they are.
People and their bodies being inseparable as they are.
Freud unable to dispense with his own body, of course.
Perhaps the real reason the Bronx Zoo set Ada free was because they couldn't break his habit of shooting arrows at visitors who taunted him.
That is, the message is the material, people and their stories being as inseparable as they are. Material also being the message, logically.
Zoo visitors and their heart waves being inseparable as they are, ergo,
Ego.
Cultures and their stories being as inseparable as they are.
Impossible to extinguish without taking out the body.
The medium also being the message, as we all know, bodies and their cultures being as inseparable as they are. A tomato is still a tomato is still a tomato, even if it contains the genes of a fish.
Some things never change.
Life is still a tragedy, a story,
a genesis.
passed down for generations, birth a comedy.
Common as laughter.
The point is, do we ever have a choice?
Common as
Or are we organs of our century, which is to say,
Clay.
don't even start to talk about when life begins,
code.
or origins being so much more diffuse than endings.
The end of your story having only one address.
You could see what was happening, this transubstantiation of being his body into having his body, or caressing the rough and smooth of its epidermis, to all appearances unchanged. He couldn't grasp it, couldn't hold in his mind a change from wine to water, any more than the moment message becomes material, material becomes man, man becomes patient, patient becomes material, and a heart cradled by latex fingers from ice chest to some other's needy cavity, drinks in and starts a new life, servant to some other emperor without clothes. It occurred to Square that he hadn't always lived in Flatland.
How much could the average Square ever know?
At first, he thought it was simply a flat land. Then she was there, her hand on his shoulder, as if to what? Tighten their troop of two? To say with a touch that she did, after all, understand, and that it would be okay. She had gone through worse, after all, and she'd come out okay. Handsome, even though her beauty was best described as rugged, the way the earth was made operatic by the ages. Gray outcroppings in her hair gave her the seriousness of a judge, but a seriousness that was sensual. Her body, like those of the catalog models, young enough to look better without robes, though unlike the models, old enough to have all trace of frivolity weathered away. The combination of a mature face on a toned body, speaking a sensual depth beyond the young, informed as it was by Requiem. I suppose it would be natural to include a sex scene in a story like this, he wrote, but how to depict it?
Square peg in a round hole?
She silenced him, putting her hand on his,
An ancient cliche.
the scent of her hair still close.
Still pressing the right buttons.
Stirrings within, beginnings again. What?
Pistil and stamen?
Albert Edeldorf never wondered, painting lots screwing. Sex was dark back in 1510. What made man animal? Pan copulating with goats and anything else he could catch. So always man was shown mounting the woman from behind.
Making the beast with two backs, as Shakespeare had it.
Often upright. 1,000 years of authors and painters and clergymen and just plain folks who were sure it was
A
Satyrs.
fashion.
And gardens.
A style.
And oysters and horny nature.
bestial and could imagine it no other way. But today, where the main sexual organ was the brain and making love is Polysemus's language, roses are red, violets are who's on top? Unless forgiveness could be found, after all, in 4 letters. AGCTs of amino acids, bodies making what bodies always made of language, the pre-larynx. Come, imprinted on a single partner.
Cementing the pair bond.
A softening in Circle's eyes, call it dilation, indicating that she was receptive.
Hearts and flowers.
And 186,000 years of conditioning, the Pavlovian dog within secretes catecholamides. Estradiol binds to estrogen receptors.
Moonlit serenade.
Likewise, testosterone washes cellular organization of the male variety. Hypothalamus, vasodilation following strictly the double helix law. Parts also anticipating exertion, precipitating vasocongestion of spongy tissue, beating within the law of the letter, the alpha and omega of cells propagating themselves, motive without mind, his bilateral symmetry having suggested to her unawares a high probability of average gametes, average being more desirable than Valentine's for its lack of irregularities. Likewise, her clear complexion, 0.7 hip-to-waist ratio, and sound teeth, a biology of selection often pronounced by these apes naked. Love? Thank you.